There's an old saying in life, man makes plans and God laughs. But a more modern interpretation of this would be working all your life to finally hit one of those big goals, buying your dream car. And it's precisely just beyond that point that life presents a better one. So yes, the theme of today's episode is dream cars, but being more specific, pedantic details and variations of dream cars. One would look at this and say, oh my God, that is a Porsche 992, but knowing the Porsche 911 world, there are many different flavors. Like for example, that is a GT3 Touring, and then anybody that knows the GT car world, there's one that is better than that, the GT3 RS. However, the folks in Vlocht, they said, well, we were very good at parting a lot of money from our customers by coming out with a Touring. Why don't we make a more expensive Touring, thus a GT3 RS Touring? However, they don't call it a Touring, they call it the ST. They gave me some whole slide about the history of ST in different rally cars from 1969 to the early 70s. There's some interesting cars there, but this is really a very different kettle of fish. This is really a car that is designed for what we're doing today, driving in canyons and more about the overall driving dynamics rather than screaming down the track. They do that in two different ways. Like for example, they take the 502 horsepower NA 4-liter flat six out of that, and here they change the camshaft profiles. They also change the breathing. The intake's a bit different, so it has 16 more horsepower, but oddly, 3 less pounds of torque than that car over there. Then another very big change, the transmission. There it has a specific clutch to the ST, much stiffer. Like that is a luxury car compared to this and shifting gears. Along with that, they changed the actual shifter inside the car itself. It's shorter by 10 millimeters. But put aside all of those details. Really, the change in the flywheel is more about lowering the weight of the car, which is the big theme here, not so much changing the output. The flywheel itself is half the weight of the flywheel of the GT3 Touring over there. Now, in a surprising twist, that does have an impact on the performance figures, but not what you'd expect. Like for example, the 0 to 60 does improve from that car, which is 3.7. This is 3.5. However, a wing version of that car is 3.2. Then there's the VMAX. This one, the Touring, is actually the fastest, 199. The wing car, 197. This one, a measly 186. Now before we jump behind the wheel, a favor. If you see value in these episodes, I would greatly appreciate if you can click like, subscribe, notifications. Most importantly, share these episodes with your friends on all your socials. Why? The YouTube algorithm, a complete bitch. Vielen Dank. Yes, you were kind of expecting this. 3,056 pounds, or depending on the express your weights and measures, 1,386 kilograms. We will talk more about that later. Oh my God. This. Okay, two things going on here. In terms of power delivery and velocity, immediacy, this is very similar to my car. It doesn't feel significantly faster. However, the overall pageantry, the experience of getting there is very different. Why? That transmission. All the bits we talked about, all the changes, the lightweight clutch, the different flywheel, the reduced ratios, all of it comes together to make this feel like a completely different 992. I'd go so far as to saying it feels like a completely different transmission, though it's not. Now, something else about the way this thing delivers power, notice what's missing from this interior. Any guesses? There is no mode switch down here, and that is because there is no modes. And I'm not really fussed by this. I'm one of those oddballs that doesn't really change the mode. What I do is I find the optimal mode of the car I'm driving. Only exception is that Lamborghini Starato we recently drove. that has a rally mode, which is trying to kill you. You're not going to use it every day. You're only going to use it up here. This car is a bit different in that it's got this charm to it. There's a certain personality to it that is different than the GT3 Touring. And I would argue the decision, probably a hard one, to not have a mode selector was the right decision. So yes, no one is really surprised that these are both fast cars, yet in an analog way. But really the theme here for both of them is lightweighting. Remember when we first saw the 992 GT3, Porsche made a huge stink that the front lid was carbon fiber. One could opt in the GT3 to have the roof as carbon fiber. I personally didn't do that. I'm second guessing that decision. This takes the entire theme of lightweighting to a completely different level where it's more about the lightweighting than some of the other changes we've discussed. For example, you do have the carbon fiber front lid, however, the fenders, the roof, and the doors all carbon fiber reinforced polymer. Then underneath the vehicle, a shearing panel. That is carbon fiber reinforced polymer. Then if that were not enough, the folks in Floch, they take this whole lightweighting theme to beyond a fanatical level. The anti-roll bars, those are carbon fiber reinforced polymer. Then of course the wheels have to change. No, not the size, same staggered 20/21 front rear. Rather the material in which they use to make the wheel. Aluminum, not good enough. Magnesium, but you would think, well, the GT3 RS, that has magnesium wheels. However, these are different. It's a different shape and really designed for the ST only. And what's fascinating is how the air is routed through the wheel to cool the brake. And that brings us to the part of our story where we get to the very rarefied air of this whole lightweighting theme. Those of you that know GT cars know this and this, lightweight glass. Well, same thing here, but they build upon that with lightweight carpeting, only in this one. Now pay no attention to the carbon fiber reinforced polymer half roll cage in this one. That is not on offer in US cars. The car you are looking at is a German market car that was flown over from Germany and is flying back at the end of the month. Now putting all that aside, what's the point of this entire exercise? Well, to lower the weight. This car, formerly the lowest weight 992 on offer at 3,222 pounds. So of course, Porsche, 2 months after I buy this car, decides to crap on my doorstep and make this one, which is almost 200 pounds lighter. So if the theme of this special edition is lightweighting, the benefit is driving dynamics. It's more about the way this drives than the way it delivers power. And you can see that in a couple of things. Number one, the steering. It immediately slaps you across the face, kind of like the clutch and the change in the transmission, although not quite to that level. The biggest difference is clearly this. The steering, I got some unusual news to share with you. You pay more and you get less. These cars do not have rear wheel steering fitted to them. It's not an option, you can't get it. Now the obvious question is, why? And they did that to remove 14.3 pounds. Now one would say, okay, they're getting fanatical with the light weighting. I don't really have a problem with that, but what does it mean? Like, how does it translate to where the rubber meets the road? And I gotta say, the result is good. Like, for example, coming from my car, having now, 1,700 miles on it, I understand where the inputs are, I understand where the turn-in is, kind of understand where I want to place the weight of that car. Here it takes a little bit of getting used to because the steering, maybe it's a bit slower, but they do change the tuning of the front rack, basically how the steering is set up front to take into account that it doesn't have rear wheel steering. And the overall result, God, this is, it is an unusual experience from a time gone by. Now another large change between this and the GT3 Touring, this button. On my car, this adjusts the damper, so the PASM. Here, it still has PASM, but it does something very different. Instead of changing the dampers, it changes how much body roll the car is allowed to have from the engineers von Flocht. And what's going on here is it changes the personality of the car, really works in conjunction with all the other bits we've talked about. That steering, the lack of the mode, the lightweight, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like it's up to me to rotate the car a bit more. I feel like it's up to me to do more with the car, to push it to its limits. And the reality, this is kind of like a Lotus Elise or cars like that. You do not have the sack to push this thing to its limits. Maybe if you're drawing a paycheck from a car manufacturer to pilot one of these things on a racetrack, maybe you do. But most people who will buy these things, they don't. And that's the beauty of this car. By making these very, very small changes to the PASM system, it gives you the opportunity to expand or really explore your limits of driving. The balance is there, the weight of the steering is perfect. So really all they're doing is kind of like a good manager. They're just taking the obstacles out of the way. So no, it is not that time again to play your favorite game on the options game, because these, you don't really roll into a Porsche store, say I'll take that one, write them a check and walk out. It will come as no surprise to anyone that they make far less than there is demand for these cars. So they're very hard to come by. I've shared with you in a complete episode of this car. It took me 3 years to get this car because of all the virus and that kind of stuff, and then a long time to get the allocation. This is even more difficult because they make less of these. This car is a limited run. They don't tell you how many they're gonna make, but they make very few each year, where this car, they've been very clear, it's a limited production, meaning they're gonna make only 1,963 of them. Why? Well, go back in your history books. What was the first year of production for a Porsche 911? That's how we get here. This car, much more expensive than this car. Base price when I bought this was $169,000. Now it's about $180,000 US. Base price on this, $290,000. Now the car you are looking at is magnificent. Believe it or not, that is not gray, that is blue. They call it shore blue. The wheels, I never in my wildest dreams thought I would buy bronze wheels, let alone love white wheels. They call this Ceramica, and what you are looking at, it is a heritage design package. That's an additional $20,650. Now what brings about the heritage design package? Well, this combination of color and wheel, and then the interior, it does change. So this car, I bought the carbon fiber buckets because I wanted to do something unique with the interior. Here, you can have anything you want as long as it's the carbon fiber bucket. In other words, you can't get the 18-way seat in this car where you could in this car. You can get a 4-way sports seat, but that's like a no-cost option. However, the heritage design, what that does, you look at the interior of this thing, it is something handed down from Jesua himself. It's got this two-tone cognac black interior, and then the inserts. The reason why I couldn't get the inserts on this car is because these cars exist. They limit the tartan or the pepita, the herringbone for these cars, because they're holding it for these cars. And here's an example. They've got this black pinstripe on cognac cloth. Absolutely comes off the page. Then that works in conjunction with some of the other details, like the door loops instead of door handles. That's an ST thing, not really a heritage design thing. But put it all together, magnificent. The paint, $4,220. There's a couple of various and sundry options, similar to what I picked here, like the extended gas tank that did that in this one, the ambient lighting. Although the ambient lighting here, they changed the projector here. It just says Porsche. It's actually, there's no pageantry with the ambient lighting here. Here, I don't know if I like it or don't like it. It's cooler than this, but it's almost, it's kind of almost says I'm a douchebag. Maybe something different, a crest, whatever it is. Anyway, putting aside the money, which this is $327,000. That's where we get into acquisition of these things. And this is where Porsche is going in a bit of a different direction. I'd go so far as to saying almost taking a page out of the Ford playbook. Remember the 2017 to 2020 Ford GT? There you had to be blessed by Ford to buy the car. No, not by your local dealer, but by Ford corporate in Dearborn. And if you were blessed to buy the car, you had to sign an agreement saying you weren't going to sell the car for at least 2 years to discourage flipping. Ford famously enforced that contract in one case. Porsche is trying to do a similar thing here, but with a bit of a different plan. Here, the only way to acquire the car, at least in the US, I can't speak to other markets, is a lease, a one-year lease. You know how I feel about debt and leasing. This is probably the one case I would make the exception for, because most folks are going to do the lease and then buy the car out of the lease. The question is, how many of those people are going to sell the car? Because I really see the market on this thing being close to the 911Rs rather than the GT3s and GT3 Tourings. Overall, I take my hat off to Porsche for doing this, because believe it or not, I see the comments. You guys made a lot of comments about the dealers, they're gouging me, and they don't sell the cars at sticker. Well, the reality is there are some dealers that do. I found one that does it, and there are others out there, and this is kind of Porsche working in conjunction with the dealers to get the cars to the end user rather than the speculator. The question is, how many other dealers will charge over and how much to get even that first year lease? Okay, so it is indeed time to pose that question. Is it all worth it? Do these changes really make a difference? And this is coming from a guy that actually drives his GT3. I've put about 1,000 miles a month in the past 2 months. I've had a lot of fun with it. The reality is this is a very different car. I think the best way to describe it, this is even more old world than a GT3 Touring, and that's why I bought the GT3 Touring, because it's analog. It's a different kind of experience from anything else out there. Yes, the engine, it's probably one of the best, if not the best engine on the market today, full stop. That's why everyone should run out and buy one if they can, because they're not going to make them anymore. This is just a higher distillation of that. I don't think it's about the engine in this old driving experience. I think this is much more about those fine-tuned bits that change the personality. It pains me greatly how much I love this thing, as much as it hurts the ears of my precious to hear that. And it's further maddening how big of a difference there is between these two vehicles. Going into it, I honestly thought, it's going to be a little bit sharper, and that's about it. It feels like a completely different car, mainly because of the transmission and the sounds, not so much the forward thrust, which brings us to the wish list. And here I'm going to ask for something incredibly personal. I like the idea of limiting the cars through some sort of arrangement for just people like me that want to keep the car. Great. However, some of us are not fans of financing and leasing. So how about you do what the Ford thing did and say, instead of a one-year lease, how about a 1 year we don't sell the car? This way we don't pay any interest, because I'm guessing you're trying to goose the income of Porsche Financial to do the lease, because that's probably the only leasing company you can get the lease through. So that's what I'm asking for. And while I'm asking for very selfish things, don't limit like the heritage design options on the inside of the car when you do have full heritage cars coming out. Some of us would like some more detail in the car from the factory. Vielen Dank. But I am one man. This is the point of the episode. To turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you found value in this episode, I would highly suggest you watch my pre-delivery inspection episode of that car, where they don't tell you this dirty secret, but when you buy your dream car, you're not the first one to drive it. The guy at the dealer is, specifically was Mike, super great guy from Galpin, Porsche Santa Clarita. He was amazing to talk to and gave us a lot of insight, so check that episode out here. And then for further details on this car, I'm doing a what's the difference between a GT3 RS Touring, or really the ST, and a regular GT3 Touring. Some of the really pedantic details, not like the larger stuff we covered in this episode, so look for that as well. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.